Good evening, everyone. My name is Takiwa Smith, founder and executive director of Science, Engineering, Mathematics Link, and I want to welcome you to this evening's Teen Science Cafe. Our Teen Science Cafe is a program of our Math and Science Career Academy, whose goal is to expose students to STEM careers and engage them in hands-on STEM activities. Our Teen Science Cafe is our program targeted to teens that provides opportunities for them to meet and interact with members of the STEM community, to learn about STEM careers as they're making critical decisions about middle school students, what they'll do in high school students, what they're doing in college, and post-graduation opportunities in an informal setting where they can ask questions, learn a little bit about their journey, and then learn a little bit about the field. So I am super excited for tonight's Teen Science Cafe, and I'm going to introduce our program coordinator, Carlin Pounders, that is going to introduce tonight's speaker for our cafe.
Hi, everyone. So tonight's speaker is Corina Newsom, who is the Community Engagement Manager at Georgia Audubon and a master's student at Georgia Southern University. Corina began in the field of wildlife conservation as a zookeeper and currently works in avian conservation, studying nest predators of the seaside sparrow and connecting people with birds across Georgia. Corina's mission is to eliminate the systemic barriers that have prevented Black, Indigenous, and people of color from working in wildlife conservation and exploring the outdoors. I'll also quickly mention that Corina has been instrumental in a digital campaign to increase the representation and exposure of Black birders this year. So she was the co-founder of a digital campaign for that. And we're very lucky to have her speaking to us tonight. And without further ado, I will hand it over to her.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Takiwa and Carlin. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be able to speak with all of you. I was once in all of your shoes trying to figure out what it is I want to do, kind of navigate the passions that I have and figure out what are the next steps given the place where I am right now and my passions. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey to where I am today and what my career has looked like, and hopefully give you an idea of what the possibilities are within the realm of conservation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Screen sharing is the name of the game these days, right? So I'm going to be taking you inside the world of wildlife conservation, focusing specifically on science in the zoo setting and field biology, which is what I'm doing right now. But as Carlin said, I'm kind of wearing two hats at the moment. I am currently a graduate student studying ornithology, which means the study of birds, at Georgia Southern University. And I'm also the community engagement manager at Georgia Audubon. Most of my science is kind of wrapped around my graduate studies and my zookeeping, so I'm going to be focusing mostly on that portion of my career. So when I was young, when I was about 4 years old, I wrote this note to myself, and it says, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be an astronaut, we can forget that part, and a scientist, and I want to be a scientist, excuse me, on bugs and animals. So from a very young age, I knew exactly, relatively, what I wanted to do. I had a very strong fascination with the natural world. And so I didn't know what to do with my passions, though, and it wasn't until I was a high school student and a Black zookeeper from my local zoo in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Zoo, reached out to me and invited me to go behind the scenes with her and see what it looked like to work in a zoo, and that is where my career basically started. And so when I was 17 years old, I started investing in my career future by interning at the Philadelphia Zoo in the education program. So I got the chance to speak with zoo guests, thousands and thousands every day, and tell them all about the wildlife they were seeing at the zoo and about what they could do to help save wildlife. And one of my favorite things about it was that I was able to kind of help nurture the fascination that kids already had, kids and adults actually, already had about wildlife, and kind of give them more information and more perspective for how they fit into the picture when it comes to wildlife conservation. And then, of course, immediately after that, I graduated high school. And because I had had that experience at the zoo, I knew for sure that I wanted to go the animal care and biology route. So in college, I majored in zoo and wildlife biology at Malone University. And during that time, I did a lot of animal care. So I spent a lot of time working in our animal facilities, taking care of all kinds of animals like birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. I got to participate in animal training, animal cleaning and husbandry, animal nutrition. And so in that first picture, that is a Senegal parrot. And in the second picture, we have what's called a sugar glider, which is a marsupial, a pouched mammal from Australia. It was also during this time in college that I fell in love with birds. So I mentioned at the beginning that I study ornithology, the study of birds, and I fell in love with birds during ornithology in college when I took that required class. And the bird that kind of got me hooked was the blue jay, which is what we call spark bird, the bird that got me paying attention to birds outside. And many of you have probably heard of blue jays. I had actually never seen a blue jay in my life until I was 20 years old and in this class because I'm from the city. I'm from downtown Philadelphia, and so there weren't really any blue jays around. So when I saw this bird, I was immediately hooked. So the combination of my college major, the experience that I got in college working with animals hands-on, the internships that I did at the zoo. So I did that first internship that I showed you pictures from in education. And then I also went back for internships every summer. It prepared me very well for life after graduating college, because oftentimes when you're working with wildlife or working in conservation, in order to get a job, you have to have experience, which sounds crazy, right? Like, how can you get experience without having a job? And that's usually through volunteer programs and internships. And so by the time I graduated, I was really well poised for a career in wildlife sciences, specifically animal care. And when I graduated, I landed a job as an ambassador animal keeper. And so I have worked in 3 different zoos. So I volunteered and interned at the Philadelphia Zoo, my home zoo. And then immediately graduating college, I worked at Cleveland Metro Parks Zoo in Cleveland, Ohio. And then most of my full-time career was at the Nashville Zoo, which is where I worked right before I worked here at Georgia Audubon. So this is a picture of what's called a Palawan binturong, which is a tree climbing mammal found in Southeast Asia. So that's why I have him on my shoulders. His name is Wilbur. They like to be up high and they have really strong tails for gripping. And you can kind of see his tail wrapping around my arm there. So my job as an ambassador animal keeper had several components, but the main overarching ones were animal care, animal training, and education. So this is a picture of me and some of my former coworkers and some of our ambassador animals. And ambassador animals, just to kind of give you a definition, are the animals that interface with the public and participate in educational programming like animal shows or school programs. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what that career, those kind of sections of that career of zookeeping looks like. And typically when we think of zookeeping, a lot of us think most immediately of animal care, right? Cleaning is probably what comes to your mind first, but it also includes something called enrichment. We take care of animal health, and sometimes we have to raise babies, which sounds great, but can be quite challenging. So when it comes to cleaning, every day zookeepers come in and their animals have made a mess, right? Doesn't matter what kind of animal you're taking care of, whether it's a large carnivore like a clouded leopard like this one, or a small invertebrate like a tarantula. Everyone makes messes. And so this clouded leopard had just had her meal. She had a guinea pig, actually. It wasn't alive when she ate it, so don't worry. But they spray guts and blood and poop all over the wall. So you come in and you take care of all the cleaning. Sometimes they make a mess because they're doing things like molting. So this is an eastern screech owl. Her name is Rhonda. She was in a molting season. And so every morning we come in and there are simply hundreds and hundreds of feathers all over her enclosure. And so we would have to clean that up every day. But she looks great now. Don't worry. When it comes to enrichment, so enrichment is any change to an animal's environment that encourages them to use their natural behaviors. And we can do that in really creative ways. So for example, this is a Sumatran tiger. And this tiger was given an icicle with blood in it, right? That sounds disgusting to us, but for a tiger, that icicle with blood in it is an opportunity for that tiger to use its strong teeth, its strong claws, to enjoy a nice, tasty, cool treat in the summertime, thus encouraging that animal to use their natural behaviors of biting and scratching and using the strength in their jaws and paws. Now, when it comes to animal health involves both preventive care, just like with humans, right? We go get checkups to make sure we're okay. And so every month, on a regular basis, we would make sure all of our animals, whether we're talking about spiders, we're talking about giraffes, right? Were healthy, so we would take their weight, we would check their body and make sure they're okay. This Chilean rose-haired tarantula was a nice 23 grams, which is healthy. But sometimes they did need veterinary care. So if something was wrong, we would have to take them to the vet. So this, you can't quite see it, but this is an American crow, which is a bird that's native to right here in North America. And he had suffered injuries in the wild and could not be released. And that injury that he suffered, he had broken one of his legs, would occasionally cause him to have some pain, particularly in the wintertime. So he would get acupuncture, believe it or not. We would have an acupuncture doctor come in and do the acupuncture procedure, which is an expensive procedure, but we do spare no expense for our animals. Now, animal training, which is one of the most fun parts of the job, takes place for a couple of reasons. One, to help us take care of the animal, so for animal husbandry, and for education. So when it comes to animal husbandry, also called behavioral husbandry, when you're talking about training, one example of a training that you would do with an animal for husbandry purposes is something called target training. So this is a clouded leopard again, like you saw a few slides ago. And she's trained to put her nose on that purple target no matter where it is, right? Every time she touches it, she gets a yummy meat treat. So if I have to move her or need her to move from one side of her enclosure to another, I'm not going to go chasing her around and pick her up and move her, right? Everyone would end up bleeding in that scenario. But if she's trained to go where that target is, I can simply put the target where I want her to go and she'll go. That makes taking care of her a whole lot easier. The same thing is similar for even our birds, right? So if I want to get a weight on this, it's called a red-legged Sariyama, I'm not going to want to chase the bird around and pick it up and hope it sits on a scale. But if I can train it to stand on a scale for a nice handful of worms, as you can see with one of our volunteers here, that makes getting the weight on this animal a whole lot easier. And then we also do animal training for education. So this is a turkey vulture who you'll see a little bit more of in a second. And we had animal shows where we would fly all kinds of birds and show off the natural behaviors of animals. And in order to do that, we would have to train those animals to exhibit those behaviors on cue and to be comfortable in front of audiences. Now, I mentioned raising babies being a very challenging element of the job. And so raising babies sounds cute, but it is very hard. But it was a very enjoyable element as well. So just a couple of examples. This is a two-toed sloth. Her name is Fern. She was an orphaned sloth down in South America. And so she needed to be taken in and raised. And so this is her when she's tiny, or not at her tiniest, but when she was pretty tiny. And then she grew up to be a nice, big, strong sloth just about a year later. And so Fern is now a full-grown sloth. Sloths are wonderful animals. Definitely encourage you to look deeper into them. This animal is called a banded palm civet, which is actually related to that large black animal that I had on my shoulders, the binturong, but they're quite a bit smaller. So this is a small baby banded palm civet who needed to be hand raised because her mother was not able to care for her. And of course, she grew up to be a still small banded palm civet that was we trained her to be comfortable with education programming. And then finally, our binturong, right? So she had a similar story where her mother was not able to produce milk. So we were hand raising her, which meant that around the clock, we had to take them home overnight, feed them milk around the clock. They're loud, they're nocturnal. So when we're trying to sleep, they're up and screaming. But it was all worth it in the end when they grew up to be nice, healthy, independent animals. And so this is, again, Wilbur, the Palawan binturong you saw earlier at his full size. From the tip of their nose to the tip of their tail, they are about 5 feet long. Now, the final element, education, is probably the most exciting one for me because this is where I get to connect people with wildlife. And so we were able to do that through a couple of different ways. The animal shows, which I mentioned, involved sharing wildlife that we have here at the zoo and their conservation plight and what the general public can do to help save wildlife was the main theme of the shows. And so we were able to show off a variety of different species and encourage people to participate in conservation in every way they could, both at the zoo and at home. And so not all zookeepers do education at this capacity, but because I am very focused and very passionate about education and outreach, which is why I have a community engagement job now, I very much enjoyed this part of the job. We also got a chance to take our animals out onto the path at the zoo to introduce people up close. So that turkey vulture, he's not giving me a hug. He's actually trying to sun himself. So he's got his wings spread out in the sunshine because vultures really enjoy doing that. And then we have a nice green-winged macaw there who's getting some nuts and seeds from me. But after about 4 years in animal care and zookeeping, remember, I had a passion for birds, and I really wanted to figure out how I could nurture that passion, what I could do to answer conservation questions about birds. Because previously in animal care, a lot of my work was focused specifically on, as I said, taking care of animals physically, which is great, right? Taking care of animal health and educating the public. I love all those elements. So I did not leave zookeeping because I didn't like it or because it was no longer my passion. I was very passionate about it. But I also realized that I really wanted to participate in the research side of wildlife conservation. And so at that point, I decided, okay, in order to kind of participate in research, I need to go to graduate school. So if you're someone who wants to answer questions about animals, about conservation in the field, going to graduate school is a great way to do that. And so I started applying for master's programs where there were professors who were answering questions about how we can help birds survive in a changing world. Because as you might know, there are a lot of changes happening to the planet, whether we're talking about climate change, right, which is raising the global temperature, causing habitats to change, plants, animals, all kinds of living things are changing and moving around because of climate change. And so because I'm passionate about birds, I wanted to figure out, how can we help? How can we both get more information and then apply that information to help birds survive in a changing world? And so at that point, I decided to go to graduate school in coastal Georgia at Georgia Southern University, where I am currently a graduate student. I'm actually in the very tail end of my degree right now. So I am finished collecting data, which I will talk to you a little bit about in a second. I am now in the end stage where I'm done with my classes and I'm just writing the research paper now, which is one of the harder parts. But that's why I'm no longer in Southern Georgia. I'm actually located in Atlanta right now and doing the rest remotely. But the species in particular that I'm studying is called the seaside sparrow. Now, this bird is a small bird, and by most people's standards, it's not brightly colored, right? A lot of times when we think of beautiful birds, we might think of all the reds and the oranges and the blues and the blacks. This bird is several shades of brown with a little dot of yellow on its face. So most people don't look at this bird and think, wow, like what an awesome bird. But these birds actually live in the coastal marshes of Georgia. So if anyone here is watching who's not from Georgia, Georgia does have a coast. So we do have a coast on the Atlantic Ocean. And on that coast, we have a salt marsh, about 400,000 acres of salt marsh on our coast. And these birds are one of hundreds of species that live in that marsh. And coastal communities, both of animals and of people, are going to be some of the first communities to experience the impacts of climate change, particularly from a problem called sea level rise. I love birds doing the splits, so this is one of my favorite pictures. But sea level rise is essentially exactly what it sounds like, right? The height of the sea is rising bit by bit. And if you live on the coast, you are right at the edge of the ocean. And so you are going to feel the impacts of sea level rise a lot more quickly than someone who's more inland, right? Like maybe Atlanta or parts of the country that are farther away from the coast. And so this bird spends all of its life, from egg to hatching to adulthood to death. It spends its entire life in the salt marsh. And the salt marsh is tidal, which means that twice a day, the water level rises and falls. And in Georgia, we actually have the highest difference between low tide and high tide of any other state on the southern Atlantic coast. The difference between low tide and high tide in Georgia can be anywhere between 6 to 8 feet. So it's a huge difference in the water level throughout the day, and it happens twice a day, right? So this is a very dynamic environment that requires a lot of really special adaptations to survive. And the seaside sparrow has lots of those. So in addition to being able to do the splits between two blades of grass, seaside sparrows are adapted to be able to only drink salt water, right? So if you and I were to go out to the ocean and drink salt water, we could die. That would very much damage our systems. But they have kidneys, or a renal system is another word for that, that is well equipped to drink salt water. So these birds rarely ever taste fresh water. They drink salt water with no problem. Because, again, as I said, they live in a tidal environment, they're actually adapted so that their eggs, if they happen to get flooded, can survive underwater for 30 minutes without drowning. And believe it or not, eggs can drown because birds, as they're developing inside the egg, will breathe through the shell. And if they're underwater, they can't breathe. So they can survive for about 30 minutes underwater while they're in the egg. Now, there is a very interesting situation happening with seaside sparrows. So again, I mentioned that the water level rises and falls twice a day where they live. And sometimes that necessarily means that occasionally, sometimes their nests will get flooded out, right? As I mentioned, they're even adapted in some ways physically to deal with that. But sometimes the nest flooding can actually kill their offspring, which is unfortunate. But they actually have a behavioral response to that. So if they lose their offspring because the nests got flooded during high tide, what they'll do is they'll build another nest right away, but they'll build it higher so that way they won't get flooded again, right? In theory, that sounds great. The problem is that when they build their nests higher off the ground, they become more visible to predators or animals that are looking for food to eat and therefore will eat their offspring. So they're really stuck between two different threats that are very detrimental, right? Nest flooding happens naturally, nest predation happens naturally, but with climate change, that balance is going to get thrown off, and it's going to be very difficult for these birds to survive because every time they raise their nest, they're going to get seen by predators. So my research is focusing specifically on nest predation. So I want to understand, how does nest predation vary across the marsh? Are there parts of the marsh that are more likely to have predators compared to other parts? What's the pattern? So I'm focusing on the nest predation side of the question. And just to kind of give you a visual here, seaside sparrows will build their nests not only in the grass, but made out of the grass. So they will build their nest in the marsh grass, usually about 2 feet off the ground or so, between 2 and 6 feet, depending on where they are. And those babies will develop in that nest. And on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see that these are chicks that have a little bit of a slit in their eye. Their eyes aren't open just yet, but they will in about a few days. And then on the right side, you can see that those are 2 fledglings, which means they, within the past probably 24 hours of when this picture was taken, left the nest for the first time. And they've got that very kind of scraggly, ratchet looking feather pattern right now, but as they mature, those feathers will kind of smooth out. But both of these are very, very sensitive, very vulnerable times in their development because they can't quite escape predation yet when they're at this stage. So to understand how predators are distributed across the salt marsh, where are they hanging out? Where are they walking? Where are they foraging? Are they more common closer to roads? Are they more abundant closer to the rivers? Is there a pattern to where predators exist most often in the marsh? And so to do that, I used a piece of equipment called a camera trap. But the marsh, again, because it's tidal, is not friendly to electronics. So I had to really kind of marsh-proof this system. So what you're seeing here looks kind of like a spaceship or something, but it's a bucket that around each pole, if you're looking at the picture on the right, has a little cotton ball dipped in sardine juice that if there's a predator nearby, they will smell that juice and kind of go sniff it walking under the bucket. And when they walk under the bucket, there is a camera facing down at them that is motion triggered, which means that when something moves in front of the camera, it will automatically take a picture. That's why it's called a camera trap. And that allows me to just see predators that are walking around the marsh and kind of get an idea of where they're hanging out. Now, the other part of my predator surveillance involved video cameras. This was probably the most vulnerable piece of electronic equipment because now we're dealing with batteries and video cameras and lots of wires. And so I had to really waterproof, saltproof, heat-proof even the material I was working with, because out in the marsh, there are no trees. There's no shade from the sun. And in southern Georgia, it's very hot. And so equipment can overheat very quickly. And then, of course, you add on the fact that the equipment will get covered in water twice a day. So you have to work pretty hard to make sure it doesn't get destroyed. And then the marsh itself, right, the mud, the grass, makes it a pretty just kind of messy environment to work with, but an awesome environment to work with. And then this picture here on the right, this is what our video camera setup looked like. And all that mud on the kind of clamp and on the camera was actually put there intentionally to kind of help it blend in so it wasn't standing out to potential predators, which actually worked. So that's great. And then if you look directly under the camera, you can see 3 little eggs. So there is a nest directly under the camera. And the camera that I was using was like any old security camera that you would get for like a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, right? So not super high tech. We didn't want to pay a whole lot of money for something that could get destroyed in a high tide, but it did the job. So in the marsh, I would walk up and down Tidal Creek. So if you look at this kind of creek that I'm crossing here, seaside sparrows like to nest along the edges of these channels, the edges of these tidal creeks. And so I would search up and down these creeks looking for seaside sparrows every single day. And so I would spend my time looking for nests. I would also spend my time transporting cameras. So as you can see here, this is kind of what it looks like to go and put a camera on a nest. And so I would spend time searching for nests, setting up video cameras, and taking care of the camera traps. And again, out there in the marsh, it looks like there's kind of nothing going on, right? It's just like a lot of grass that looks exactly the same. But when you're up close and in it, there is so much life. Like even in this tidal creek right here, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of crabs. There are ribbed mussel. There are oysters. There are insects. And then there are lots of different kinds of birds even. So there have been many times when I was walking around in the marsh and accidentally happened upon like 30 huge egrets or herons or big birds that were snacking on the crabs and scare them up. And there would be just a huge flushing event. And it was absolutely incredible. And so being out there in the marsh, even though I'm going to let you watch this one more time, even though it was very hot, and I'm talking about hot, right? Like 90 to 100 degrees. The blades of grass can be really sharp and stingy. It was the most incredible experience I have ever had. And there were times out there where I was really done with the heat, but I incredibly miss being able to go out there and look at all the biodiversity that the place has to offer. Now, we're going to get into the part to kind of see, to demonstrate to you what it actually looked like to spy on wildlife, right? So I had all those camera traps out there in the marsh. I had all those video cameras out there monitoring seaside sparrow nests. And I was able to see a whole lot of drama, I'll tell you that much, as well as some cool wildlife interactions and just species. So I'm going to start with the camera traps first and kind of introduce you and show you a little bit about the kinds of footage that I saw on the camera traps. And again, the camera trap setups were designed to help me get pictures of animals that were walking around, focusing specifically on predators. And for this project, I was actually looking closely at mammalian predators that are mammals, because those are typically the most common predators of seaside sparrows. So let's look through. So as I said, these camera traps were taking pictures every time something moved under the camera, right? So this night, what you're seeing right now is a rat, but it is not the kind of rat that we think of when we think of rats, right? It's not a city rat, or those are technically called Norway rats, not the rats you see throughout Atlanta, right? This is called a marsh rice rat. So this is a rat that's actually adapted to live in wetland environments. And so oftentimes they would come out at night looking for food. Now, I will say that part of being a biologist is having to deal with a lot of noise, so to speak, when it comes to data, right? So for every picture that I got of an animal, there were about 100,000 pictures of nothing but grass, right? So the particular kind of question that I was answering required that I look through a whole lot of footage for my research. But that meant that every time I saw a picture of an animal, it was like Christmas morning. I literally could not wait to get the memory cards out of the cameras and plug them into my phone, because I could not wait to see the animals that I was going to see from the camera trap. So this is a marsh rice rat checking out the camera trap. Then we got some mammals that are really hard to capture, like American mink. Now, mink are a mammal that is actually related to ferrets and weasels, shaped very much like that, and otters as well, believe it or not. And they are also a semi-aquatic mammal. So they're really well adapted for swimming, for life in a wetland environment where there's a lot of water, for hunting underwater even. So we got several pictures of American mink moving around in the marsh. which was awesome. And I only got probably 3 pictures of mink over the course of 2 whole years. I got hundreds of pictures of rats, right? But when it came to the mink, they were very hard to capture. So every time I saw a picture of one of these, I screamed. Then we would get some really familiar animals like raccoons. So raccoons, another animal that is probably by most people associated with city environments. This was a species that was one of the most common out in the marsh. So raccoons are really well known for being very adaptable, right? So they, you can find them in cities, you can find them in forests, you can find them in grasslands. You can find them in a tidal marsh, right? So not an animal that you would necessarily associate with an aquatic environment, but they are extremely adaptable and able to survive in all kinds of different ecosystems. And so the marsh was really no challenge for the raccoon. And in this picture, we actually have a mama raccoon and one of her babies. So that's what you're seeing. That larger raccoon is the mother, and the smaller one there is one of her offspring. And this is another time when I screamed when I saw this picture. And there was about 10 or 15 pictures of 2 siblings playing together under the camera trap, which was very funny. See here? All right, hold on one second. Let me exit out here because I think we froze up a little bit here. Okay, and we're back. And so this is another really funny image of a raccoon that I captured. And sometimes these animals made me laugh, right? There were many times when the raccoons were doing something crazy on the camera trap. So for example, there was one night when one of the raccoons, you see those cotton balls on the poles that I mentioned, because they're dipped in sardine juice, they smell a lot like food, right? They smell very attractive to a raccoon. This raccoon took its dirty little hands and just snatched off the cotton balls right off the pole. I'm surprised it didn't happen more often. It only happened one time. But sometimes animals would kind of get in the way of your research and you would have to go back out and repair something or reset something, because usually always a raccoon had something to do with its demise, but that just comes with the territory, with working with wildlife and working out in a dynamic environment like a marsh. And then sometimes you got some unexpected footage, right? So this is actually an image during high tide. So as I said, you go from low tide, right, where there's no or very little water on the ground, to high tide, where the water level is basically up to the cotton ball, right? So that's about, just for perspective, that's about 2 feet at that point. And that animal right there is a diamond-backed terrapin, which is actually a threatened species of turtle that lives on the coast of Georgia. And he, this is funny, he actually clearly can smell the sardine juice on the cotton ball because he's biting it. So that is actually a picture of a terrapin reaching up with its open mouth to attempt to take a bite out of a cotton ball. Thankfully, he did not take it down, and he definitely didn't eat it. But when I saw this turtle, I definitely did not expect a turtle to have such a strong sense of smell. Apparently they do. I don't study turtles, so I don't know a whole lot about them, but it's clear that diamondback terrapins can find food by using their sense of smell. And then sometimes we got some passersby, like various other bird species. So what you're looking at right now is a boat-tailed grackle, which is another bird species that lives and actually occasionally nests out in the marsh. And this one was just curious, probably happened upon the camera trap. It's very obvious. It's a big white contraption. And so we've had many birds kind of walk under and stare up into the camera, giving us some really awesome footage like this. And again, you can see what the difference between low tide and high tide looks like again. So this is a low tide, very little water on the ground, and that's high tide, about 3 feet of water under the camera. Now we're getting into the good stuff. So those were some of the images that I had from the camera traps, right? So we got to see lots of different animals, walking around and snapping pictures of them from those, again, big white contraptions I had throughout the marsh. But then we also had video cameras on the nest. And the reason why I put video cameras on the nest was so that if a predator came by, I could see who was responsible. And so I've got a couple of videos to show you. Now I didn't put all the videos on here because there were some that were honestly pretty gruesome. And even biologists, right? Some people, they say, oh, I can't be a a biologist because, you know, there's a lot of, you see a lot of sad things in nature sometimes, right? Or I can't be a veterinarian because you have to do things like put animals down, right? So there's elements of careers, especially working with animals or working with wildlife in general, that are sad, right? So there were actually times when I was watching videos of nest predation and I shed a little tear because it was hard to watch. But it is part of nature. I don't have any videos like that in here, so don't worry. But I do want to show you some videos of nest predation with eggs. And this one, let's take a look here. Wait for it. Boom! That is an American mink. And took the egg right out of the nest. I'm going to rewind this one more time so you can see that. Watch the mink take the egg in its mouth because I think it's entertaining. Okay, so the mink is walking around and then pops right up into the camera. Boom, and then proceeds to take the single egg right out of the nest, and just like that. And so, you know, I would come back the next day or a couple of days later and I would see a nest that no longer had any eggs or maybe any chicks in it. And, you know, I would be able to tell a lot of times if it was found by a predator because the nest would be torn down. Like you can see now, it's not facing, oh, it came back. I actually don't think I saw this far into the video. So we're watching this together for the first time. Yeah, so you can see it destroying the nest even more, right? So I would see that the nest was destroyed, but I wouldn't know who did it without having a video camera. And it's really important that we know which species are actually the ones that are finding and eating seaside sparrow nests for my research that I'm conducting. So that was a really cool thing to see. So that, again, was an American mink, like the one we saw in the picture a few slides ago. And then here we go with another animal that we saw on the camera trap. Also looking for a midnight snack. Boom, there we go. That is the marsh rice rat that you saw on that first camera trap slide, giving us a nice cute view of its face. And so this marsh rice rat, all the animals that you're seeing, of course, are, they do eat meat, they eat other animals, but they also eat plants, marsh rice rats. So they're pretty omnivorous. They'll eat both plant material and animal material. And seaside sparrow eggs are definitely one of their favorite. I'll play this one more time just so you can kind of get a look. And they are really good climbers. So they're small, but they can climb up the marsh grass without bending the grass over. So being small and lightweight is an advantage. And of course, that allows them easy access to seaside sparrow eggs and other nests. So this species of rat will walk around the marsh. They actually build their nests in the marsh. They look a lot like bird nests. And then they'll walk around looking for food to feed themselves and their babies. All right, now this one, okay, I'm going to preface this. This is a really surprising one, right? So as I mentioned, seaside sparrows are not the only birds that live out in the marshes of Georgia. There are other birds, bigger, smaller, but the bird you're about to see right now is about half the size of a seaside sparrow, but 3 times the personality, okay? So seaside sparrows and this species called marsh wrens, which is the species you're about to see, they live in the same areas. They build their nests in the same places. They eat the same thing, right? Lots of insects, lots of little crabs. So they fill a very similar what's called niche. They build nests in the same places, eat the same food, live in the same geographic region. So that means that there is some competition between seaside sparrows and these birds called marsh wrens. Now, wrens in general, there are lots of different species of wrens found throughout Georgia. This one lives in the marshes. Wrens in general, whether you're talking about on the coast or in a forest or in a grassland, they're all very territorial birds. They're known for scaring off birds from their territory, even killing the eggs of their own species to make sure that they are the only ones using the resources in their area. And what we're going to see now is exactly what it looks like for this species to exhibit territoriality. So let's take a look here. So here we've got an incoming marsh wren. Watch what it does to the egg. It is poking holes in it like it's nobody's business, right? Watch this. And not only is it poking holes, but if you look closely, it's a little grainy because again, these are, oh yeah, look at that. Not only are they poking holes, but this one is also eating the yolk of the seaside sparrow egg, which makes it not only an act of territoriality, right, trying to kill the offspring of a nearby seaside sparrow, it also makes them a predator. Now watch this. The marsh wren does not stop at beating the egg with its beak, poking holes, eating the yolk. It takes it one step further and throws the egg out of the nest. Now, what's really, really crazy about this, you guys, is that I have found numerous nests, right, where it didn't seem like the egg was torn, or the nest was torn down by a predator, like how we saw with the mink, right? Take a look at the bottom left-hand side of the screen. That marsh wren has resurfaced. Okay. So the nest was not torn down like I saw with the mink, right, where it kind of jumped up into the nest, tore the nest down, and took the egg out. The nest was completely intact, but sometimes I would find eggs that were cracked open or eggs that were just gone with no trace. And it was a mystery. You know, I was like, maybe, I honestly had no idea what on earth was happening, why eggs were literally just disappearing, but the nest was just fine. And it turns out, once I got these video cameras on nests, I realized that the culprit are the marsh wrens. They take the eggs, they poke holes in them, and they will carry them out of the nests, leaving just about no trace. So when I saw this, it answered a really big question for me and for other scientists who study seaside sparrows. So one of the reasons why science is so fun is because you get to answer questions that people don't have the answers to, right? You get to see things that people have never seen before, especially with technology like cameras, where people would never be able to see it with their naked eye. So we'll just watch this marsh wren carry this egg out one more time. Boom, straight like that. Now, wildlife science looks like a lot of different things, right? So I'm a biologist who goes out into the field, studying birds in particular, looking specifically at nesting, looking specifically at predators, and a very specific environment called a salt marsh, right? But conservationists and biologists come in all shapes and sizes, have all different kinds of careers. They work in all different kinds of environments. Some work in the cold, some work in the heat, some work where it's dry, some work where it's wet. Some people work with microbes. Some people work with huge megafauna like birds and large carnivores. And so this career can look a lot of different ways. But I want to, before we end here today, kind of share with you an opportunity, if you are in Georgia in particular, especially in Atlanta, to be able to kind of get a little exposure to various careers and fields in wildlife science. So I am an ornithologist, but there are lots of different kinds of ologists. And at Georgia Audubon, which is where I work as a community engagement manager, we have a program called Atlanta Urban Ecologists that essentially exists to give young people, 8th graders through 12th graders, the opportunity to be able to go behind the scenes of different careers, talk to different wildlife professionals and environmental scientists, and learn about what their jobs look like, and kind of equip them with information to help them make decisions about their career, give them connections to professionals in the field, and an opportunity for them to ask questions about the fields that they might be interested in. So there are lots of scholarships available actually for Atlanta Urban Ecologists. So if you are interested in learning more, I would be absolutely happy to share more information about Atlanta Urban Ecologists. I highly recommend it because one of the most important things when you're choosing any career, whether you want to work in wildlife science, any STEM career, any career at all, it's very helpful to get kind of an up-close look at what careers look like, right? Because a lot of people, when they look at zookeeping, they might imagine, I just play with animals all day, right? But there's actually a lot more work that goes into it. When people think of biologists, they might imagine that their job is different than what it actually looks like. But any opportunity that you have to talk with biologists or talk with professionals in the field that you're interested in will help you get clarity, understand, is this actually something that I want to do, or give you exposure to something you didn't even know existed, and maybe steer your path more towards what you want to do and where your passions lie. So any opportunity for you to connect with professionals in the field you're interested in, get exposure and get a behind the scenes look at the work they're doing will definitely help to set you up for finding the career that you are most interested in. And so with that, I will take any questions that we might have. And I will stop sharing my screen now and head back to the page. Okay.
Hey, so we actually have Cambridge Wildlife Arts watching, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And, they shared a question. Are these battles over territory happening only when birds occupy the same niche?
That's a good question. So there can be a lot of territoriality that happens even when animals do not have overlapping niches, right? So for example, right, this is a very extreme example, but a lot of times, especially in urban environments where there's a lot of people in areas where there are also a lot of wildlife, you'll see owls, right? Just like a nocturnal bird of prey that, humans are not actively filling the same niche as an owl, right? We're not living and nesting in trees. We're not chasing small rodents, right? But an owl will absolutely, or I shouldn't say not always, but they've been seen to fly at the heads of joggers outside, right? Or defend their territory against intruders. So we can see these kind of aggressive interactions, even when two species don't fill the same niche. If there is even a perceived threat to the presence of another animal, that is enough to kind of trigger those kinds of behaviors, those territorial behaviors. In this scenario, it is driven exclusively by the fact that marsh wrens don't want anything else occupying the space or using the resources that they want to have to themselves. Good question.
So I'm curious, do you do any tagging of the birds?
That's a good question. So as part of my research, so it doesn't actually contribute directly to the questions that I was trying to answer about nest predation, but as part of my work out there in the marsh, I did have several days where I would go out and band seaside sparrows. So what that really looks like is we are out there, we put up these very lightweight nets to kind of catch birds as they're flying, immediately take them out of the net. And then we'll put two little very lightweight plastic bands that they really can't even feel on their legs so that, when they nest again the next season, we can kind of see, because my advisor studies more of this, we can kind of see, is the same bird using the same space year after year? Like, are they coming back to that same tidal creek, kind of when I showed you a video? Are they coming back to the same location to build their nests? That's called site fidelity, when a bird or an animal kind of comes back to the same place year after year, either to breed or to forage, whatever it might be. So to kind of get an idea of how these birds move around and learn more about individual behaviors. So that's the reason why we banded the birds. And so we definitely did that out there in the marsh.
Nice. And speaking of being in the marsh, like, as I was watching your presentation, I loved the photos. Like, it was just amazing to see like these professional shots from the work that you do. And then also the video footage. Curious as to, was it drones that got that footage, or was it the cameras that you set up?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the video of me walking around in the marsh, that I actually got that footage because a friend of mine who's he actually is a cinematographer for BBC. He went out, he lives in the area, and so he was like, let's go out and get some footage. So yeah, he took his drone and just like followed me around out in the marsh for about an hour or so, and just got a lot of really cool footage that I certainly would not have been able to get on my own. But it was very much like the drone was right behind my head, and it sounded like a swarm of 1,000 bees, like zzz, but it was very cool. The footage turned out really awesome, and yeah, so that's where that came from.
Awesome. Another question that I have, that, I hope that you can answer. I feel like, in the, era that we're living in, where literally just as you mentioned, especially when we have, more high-tech technology at our disposal, or even something like social media to, kind of add to these traditional paths and traditional careers. I'm curious if you have, a response to what youth can look forward to in a role similar to this, or any other STEM professional role where, not only are you doing the research, but also there's all these other amazing things that are happening to make your career even more exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And you nailed it there, because, I was able to employ a lot of kind of newer new-ish technology in my research. The security cameras were not newish high tech at all, but things, part of my research involved using GIS, which is geographic information systems, where you can kind of look at any part of the world essentially and map all kinds of information. I can get elevation data, right? So how high is the ground where I'm standing above the sea level? I can get data about, grasses and plants and animals. Like, with increasing and kind of fine-tuning technology, which is happening very rapidly, we're able to collect data, which is essentially, we're able to see information about the world around us that we could not see before. Whether because, back in the day, right, getting the volume of information that I have now would have taken many, many people and way more time, right? Or just wouldn't be possible at all, right? Before video cameras existed, you couldn't stand over a nest and watch it because you would scare everything away. So we're able to see elements of the world around us, whether you're talking about biology or astronomy, whatever it is, that you aren't able to see before, and to be able to be on the cutting edge of that, right? So be able to be in the career as this technology is happening is so exciting. It's so exciting, right? And I promise you, every time I kind of look at this geographic information systems, and I'm looking at the world, I'm like looking on my computer screen at the place that I study and zooming in and I'm just like, how am I seeing this from my room in Atlanta? You know what I mean? It's crazy, right? And so being able to be kind of in the field as these technologies are happening is very exciting. And there's also opportunity to be on the side of making that technology, right? I don't participate in that part of the science. I kind of receive the technology and use it. But there are plenty of fields where you are actually the one making the technology. And because we are answering so many important, urgent questions right now about the natural world around us, there is a huge market and a huge need for minds and thinkers in that very realm. People who are making technology better, people who are making it easier and more effective to collect data about any number of realities, right? So we need more people in that field. And so there is room for you, definitely, if you're interested.
That is I love that answer. I am so happy you were able to answer that. And then our last question for the night is a really good one. Are there myths about careers involving the environment that stop young people from thinking about them positively?
That's a good question. I would say what I immediately think of when I hear that question. So as I mentioned, I'm from the city, like the city, like I had no contact with wildlife growing up. So I really didn't start even getting outdoors until I was in my early 20s, right? Growing up in the city, wildlife was really thought of as like vermin and like, exterminated, right? Like wildlife was not really viewed as something to be enjoyed or studied or appreciated. It was kind of something to get rid of and to kind of, like eliminate from your surroundings. And so there was never really a lot of positive dialogue, just in my general living community, about animals. And so people who study biology were kind of looked at as like, why are you messing with them animals? Like that, they're dirty, they're nasty. It's like, it's dangerous. It's, so there were just a lot of assumptions simply because people had never been around wildlife. And so depending on where you're from, you might hear all kinds of different kinds of, misconceptions or myths. But I would say that, I think the one that was probably the most, I really wasn't affected a whole lot by people's myths or misunderstandings about the career, because they still happen to me to this day. But the one that I hear most prevalently is that, there are some careers that don't pay a whole lot, but, there's no money in doing environmental science. There's no money in studying the natural world. And while it's not like the highest paying job for sure, there is a lot of room, especially depending on what space you occupy. If you're on the technology side, oh my gosh, there is plenty of resources there for you. So that being a big one, like you can't, you won't be able to have a living working with wildlife. That's not true all the time. That's not true. And then also, again, like I said, that wildlife are kind of this repulsive existence that you're just kind of disgusted by. Wildlife aren't disgusting. They are fascinating. And if you have any inkling, any interest, even the slightest interest to look more closely at wildlife, you will not regret it. I promise you.
Awesome. Well, definitely want to thank you for leading us on this amazing, like, I really felt like we were in the marshes, in the salt marshes. Like, if anyone else felt that way, please put it in the comments if you agree. You know,
and I also, if it's okay, I'm going to put in the chat here a link to the Atlanta Urban Ecologists.
Yes.
Can I?
Definitely.
Let's see. I'm going to put it in the private chat if you wouldn't mind sharing it, because I don't see. Yeah. So that is the link.
We definitely encourage, you know, those who are watching, who are able to participate in that, definitely, you know, sign up and head to this link.
Yeah, and it's a school year long program where, like, twice a month you kind of have educational opportunities throughout the school year. So it's a really great program to kind of be involved with if you're interested.
Nice. Well, you're wrapping up.
Thank you so much, Corina. That was so awesome. Like, you caught great videos. I was like, am I in the marsh with her? And as a person who does not like outside like that, it was just fascinating. I couldn't, go away. So I think the videos are really great. Any parting advice, words that you want to give people that are interested, in wildlife and studying wildlife, or working at a zoo, or if they're interested in it but they don't want to touch the animals, like seeing that all those animals eat other animals, I was like, it's supposed to, right? They got to eat, but just seeing that, like, yeah. What advice for those people who really want to get dirty and get in it, but those who kind of like it but don't want to get dirty? Like, what are advice that you have for people that have somewhat interest in, wildlife, studying wildlife, or capturing images of wildlife?
That's a great question. So if you're interested in wildlife, so if you're someone who, has a strong passion for the outdoors, for animals, for, various species, I would definitely encourage you. So if you're interested, for example, in zoo science, if you're in the Atlanta area or wherever you are, I would go to your local zoo's website. Zoos typically have kind of career development opportunities for people at different levels. So if you're in, it's usually middle and high school is kind of where it starts. So they might have zoo team programs, is typically what they're called, opportunities for you to go to the zoo and volunteer, kind of get some behind the scenes looks at how zoos operate and get kind of career exposure. So look for your local zoo team programs. If you're looking specifically, or if you're more interested, you think, in kind of outdoor science and being out in the natural habitat of wildlife and studying wildlife, there are a variety of ways to get plugged in. A lot of it can seem very ambiguous, right? Which is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't really know what to do to get involved. What I would encourage you to do, right? There's no single way to kind of plug into those kinds of careers. If you are on social media, this is not typical, I don't think. But in this kind of age of social media being a very powerful platform for connecting people, if you want to study carnivores, right? Go on Instagram, go on Twitter, maybe even Facebook. I don't use Facebook like that. Use hashtags, right? This is what I do. I'll type in hashtag Black mammologist, or Black ornithologist, or Black biologist, Black, what do you call the fish people? I can't remember what they're called. But I will type in, right. Or I'll type in, if I'm looking for like Black scientists, or if you're looking for any kind of scientist of any background, right? Type in hashtag that kind of scientist, and it sounds like almost like that's not official. It doesn't have to be official. Not only will you see all kinds of different kinds of people, different kinds of careers, you can very easily connect with them, slide into their DMs, as they say, right? And just say, hey, what did you do to get to where you are? Or, hey, can you tell me more about your work? Every scientist I know is bursting at the seams, ready to be able to help mentor or guide younger people who want to be where they are, who want to be in the field where they are, right? Because there are 1,000 different ways to get into biology, but the best way is to connect with someone in the field already. That is always the best way. And that's exactly how it happened for me. I connected with a zookeeper, and the rest was history from that point. Connecting with an individual is great. If you're interested in what I'm studying, I would absolutely be happy to connect with you and tell you more about what I did, and maybe help guide you as far as where to get experience depending on the interests that you have. My name is Corina Newsom, and I am on social media as Hood Naturalist. It's like Hood_naturalist. But so you can feel free to reach out to me there. for people who have maybe an interest, but are like, you know what I mean? Animals, which is where I was at one point in my life. Like bugs, to this day, bugs are too much for me sometimes. But if you're not sure, I would encourage you to go outside wherever you are. If you have a yard, if you have green space where you are, spend like 10 minutes just sitting out there and looking closely at the life, at the plants, at the bugs, at the birds, right? At the mammals are harder to find, but look at the living things, right? Just look closely. And as you kind of get to know the species that live around you, you will be that will do dramatic works for your comfort in being outside. And then you can take it up a notch, right? So if you love birds, right? Download bird identification apps, maybe get a pair of binoculars, right? And not everyone has a green space near that, like in their home or on their home property. So go to a local park, right? Just spend time purposefully being still and looking closely while you're outside. And you'll realize there is, one, a lot more life than you might have thought was there. And two, that it's not quite as disgusting as maybe you thought it was, which is exactly how I got to be more comfortable working with wildlife coming from a really urban environment.
Okay, and then this is definitely last question. Your words of wisdom for just generic career advice, that if I want to be a STEM professional, doesn't necessarily have to be in your field. What is your words of wisdom to teenagers that are interested in STEM, no matter what their career path is?
One of the most incredible words of wisdom that I have, and this is more just kind of a frame of mind. Dr. Ray Wynn Grant, who is a Black woman and large carnivore biologist, who I greatly admire.
She studies bears, right?
Yes.
I've seen her with bears. I'm like, what is she doing?
Yes. Bears, lions, and other. She's phenomenal. She said, "Don't let your performance outweigh your passion." Right? A lot of people, right? They're in high school or middle school, and they get bad grades in science, or they don't do super well in math, right? And so immediately they think, I can't be a scientist, or I can't do anything that involves math. That is not true. I know so many people who have failed math classes, even in college, who are doctors now, who are biologists now, right? And the reason why they're biologists and doctors now is because they had a passion for what they were studying, right? They may, have struggled in certain subject areas, but continuing on in the path and finding mentors to help you in those areas, finding people to strengthen you in those areas is what you do. You don't leave because you did poorly in some subjects, right? If your passion is there, go with your passion. And so again, don't let your performance outweigh your passion when it comes to choosing how you proceed in your career. And then secondly, kind of reiterating what I said before, no matter how young you are, even if you're in middle school or you're in college or you graduated college or you're way far from college, right? No matter where you are on the spectrum, I would encourage you to take advantage of every opportunity that you have. As I said before, to kind of get a good look at what the career looks like, right? Because there are careers that even now that I'm not interested in, but that I have misconceptions about, right? I have an idea of what it is, but I really don't understand it. And when you're kind of choosing a path, especially kind of when you're in college and choosing a major, it's important to really understand as best you can what actually goes on in that career. Because you might find that, you thought zookeeping was fun, right? And then you're outside in the heat, right? Scooping poop or doing whatever. You're like, yeah, I don't like this, right? Or maybe you thought biology wasn't fun and you thought all it was sitting on a computer or in a lab with goggles on and a white coat. And it's like, oh, wait, no, people are out walking around in the marsh and looking at animals right in front of their face, right? So things can look a lot differently than what they seem from what we see on TV or whatever our information source might be. So again, connect with scientists, and social media is a completely legitimate way to do that. Find scientists who are studying what you want to study and connect with them. Find ways to go behind the scenes. If you're in college, there might be professors at your university who study kind of the subject matter that you are interested in, even if they're not your professors. Connect with them, figure out what they study, ask if you can go out into the field with them, right? There are various things you can do depending on what stage you're at, but connecting with individuals and getting a close look at the careers before you commit to it necessarily, I think is very important.
Well, thank you so much, Corina. We have learned so much from you, and we thank you so much for your time. What we didn't share is that, and we hope that the pandemic is over, we can do it again. Corina got Jason, and I didn't even know who Jason was. Like I said, I don't pay attention to birds, right? Got Jason Ward. Everybody's like, how you got Jason? I'm like, what? to do bird walks. And so we are looking forward to being able to hopefully do that sometime next year, right?
Definitely.
Depending on, stuff changing and how this pandemic is treated, but introducing and allowing us to introduce you to birding. So thank you so much, because I'm a chemical engineer. I will expose kids to chemistry and engineering all day, every day, but there are some kids that are going to be birders, right? And thanks to people like you and getting them out there, I saw the kids. I was just like, oh, all those kids are going to be birders, even if they're amateur birders. Just the way they were interacting with you, and you could tell that passion, that you all had for birding and knowledge. So thank you so much for allowing us to inspire some future birders and wildlife biologists.
And thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. And anytime I can contribute my knowledge or experience to anyone's path, the same was done for me, so I know from experience how important that is. So it's an honor to be able to ever do it for others. So thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Teen Science Cafe. All those kids in the chat. Just the way they were interacting with you. You can tell that passion that you all had for birding and knowledge. So thank you so much. It's this echo. I don't know where that comes from. But wildlife biology. Okay, so I'm sorry about that technical difficulty. I'm like, what? For everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And so we can get your feedback. There is a survey in the chat, whether you're watching it live or you're catching it on our YouTube channel, please, or Facebook, fill out the chat if you watched it. Also, there are great links that Carlin put in there for the birds that we saw. You even had the bird that was eating the other bird. Well, what were he doing? They weren't eating the other bird. They were territorial, right? Like getting.
But they were eating the egg. Yeah.
Yeah. So the birds that we talked about that Corina shared in her presentation, you put something about the area, right, Carlin? Like the area that she studied in the chat.
I did the birds. I did the link to the Atlanta Urban Ecologists.
Okay.
Her Instagram page.
So look for the chat for the survey. Please do the survey so we can bring more scientists and engineers and know how you like this, so we can know what to bring you and all the resources to study the birds. And if you're in the Atlanta area, to get a part of the Georgia Audubon's program to train future birders. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Corina, and good night. See you at the next Teen Science Cafe.